All right, YouTube. This is Detroit's HPTV coming at you with a daily dose of some news. I want you to watch this reaction video that I'm finna do to Ta-Nehisi Coates and Democracy Now! As they paint a narrative that wants to induce African Americans, foundational blacks, into picking a side or sympathizing with what's going on in the Middle East. Now, let me first say this. Arabs ran the slave trade, Zionists financed the trade, American Caucasians were the biggest consumers. All three have been our oppressors. And now that they are engaged in conflict with each other, they sent out our so-called intellectuals to pull on our heartstrings. And ironically, I want you to see how they're using Martin Luther King to control this narrative, as if Martin Luther King was not a pacifist. Check this out. This for fair usage, commentary, and educational purposes.
A ceasefire after 27 days of Israel's bombardment of Gaza, we spend the rest of the hour with the acclaimed author and journalist Ta-Nehisi Coates. This summer, he spoke at a literary festival in the West Bank that connected the Palestinian struggle with decolonization struggles around the world. In Ramallah, he opened his remarks with a comparison between the struggle of African Americans and Palestinians. In recent weeks, Coates joined dozens of other writers and artists in signing an open letter from.
Now I'm going to stop right there, and then I'm going to let it play so that you can see what he's saying. Why would the African American struggle be anything to compare to what's going on in the Middle East, when all those are the three major players in the oppression of us? Now, it gets deep, because I want you to watch how emotional this black man is after spending 10 days in the Middle East with them peoples. Check it out. Fair usage, y'all.
From participants in the Palestine Festival of Literature that was published in the New York Review of Books, and called for, quote, the international community to commit to ending the catastrophe unfolding in Gaza and to finally pursuing a comprehensive and just political solution in Palestine.
Last night, Ta-Nehisi Coates participated in another event hosted by organizers of the Palestine Festival of Literature, or PALFest, in the James Chapel at Union.
Okay, you see who's pulling him on the forum. He's with the Palestinians now. As you watch this video, I want you to see how confused he really is with the narrative. He empathizes and sympathizes with both sides of a conflict, but the message that he wants us to have is we should feel some type of way, when in all actuality, black people don't have a dog in this fight. Let them do what they do.
Theological Seminary here in New York City. It was called But We Must Speak, on Palestine and the Mandates of Conscience. Ta-Nehisi is the recipient of a prestigious MacArthur Fellowship and the recipient of numerous prizes, including the National Book Award for his book Between the World and Me. We Were 8 Years in Power is another book, an American tragedy, and his memoir, The Beautiful Struggle. His novel is titled The Water Dancer. In 2014, he wrote an award-winning cover story for The Atlantic magazine, headlined The Case for Reparations. Ta-Nehisi, welcome back to Democracy Now! It's great to have you with us under extremely difficult circumstances. Last night, this remarkable event almost didn't happen. I mean, it was in the James Chapel of Union Theological Seminary, but venue after venue had said no to this gathering, and without almost any publicity, well over 1,000 people turned out, but the place only held 300, so people went over across the street to another place of 300, overthrow, and then thousands watched on the live video stream. Can you talk about your experience being in the West Bank, going to the occupied territories, and how it changed you?
Oh, wow. I spent 10 days in Palestine, in the occupied territories, and in Israel proper. I've had the great luxury over the past 10 years of seeing a few countries. I have not spent more time or seen more of another country or another territory than I did this summer. I think what shocked me the most was in any sort of opinion piece or reported piece or whatever you want to call it that I've read about Israel and about the conflict with the Palestinians, there's a word that comes up all the time, and it is complexity. That and its closely related adjective, complicated. And so while I had my skepticisms and I had my suspicions of the Israeli government, of the occupation, what I expected was that I would find a situation in which it was hard to discern right from wrong. It was hard to understand the morality at play. It was hard to understand the conflict. And perhaps the most shocking thing was I immediately understood what was going on over there. Probably the best example I can think of is the second day when we went to Hebron, and the reality of the occupation became clear. We were driving out of East Jerusalem. I was with the Palestinian, with PalFest, and we were driving out of East Jerusalem into the West Bank, and you could see the settlements, and they would point out the settlements, and it suddenly dawned on me that I was in a region of the world where some people could vote and some people could not. And that was obviously very, very familiar to me. I got to Hebron and we got out as a group of writers and we were given a tour by a Palestinian guide. And we got to a certain street and he said to us, I can't walk down this street. If you want to continue, you have to continue without me. And that was shocking to me. And we walked down the street and we came back and there was a market area. Hebron is very, very poor. It wasn't all.
First of all, I'm gonna say this. He over in the Middle East at the Israeli border and the Gazan border. How is it shocking that they have checkposts when they've been at war for like the last over 60 years? 60 plus years? Come on. Watch the narrative, people.
Always very poor, but it's very, very poor. Its market area has been shut down, but there are a few vendors there that I wanted to support. And I was walking to try to get to the vendor, and I was stopped at a checkpoint. Checkpoints all through the city. The checkpoints obviously all through the West Bank. Your mobility is completely inhibited, and the mobility of the Palestinians is totally inhibited. And I was walking to the checkpoint.
Now I want you to watch this double talk. At this point right here, he's identifying with the Palestinians, but watch how he switches and starts identifying with the Israelis. And it's like he is really confused about how to even feel as it relates to what he's talking about. Listen closely. This is media. This is media I'm showing you. He just said he's identifying with the Palestinians and he's talking about the Palestinians. Watch how he flips flops and watch how they pull Martin Luther King Jr. into this. And let me say again, it's for fair use of commentary purposes.
And an Israeli guard stepped out, probably about the age of my son. And he said to me, "What's your religion, bro?" And I said, "Well, I don't, I'm not really religious." And he said, "Come on, stop messing around. What is your religion?" I said, I'm not playing. I'm not really religious. And it became clear to me that unless I professed my religion and the right religion, I wasn't going to be allowed to walk forward. So he said, well, okay, so what was your parents' religion? I said, well, they weren't that religious either. He says, what were your grandparents' religion? And I said, my grandmother was a Christian. And then he allowed me to pass. And it became very, very clear to me what was going on there. And I have to say, it was quite familiar. Again, I was in a territory where your mobility is inhibited, where your voting rights are inhibited, where your right to the water is inhibited, where your right to housing is inhibited, and it's all in.
First of all, Ta-Nehisi Coates, ain't no Israeli soldier at a checkpoint say, "What's your religion, bro?"
Inhibited based on ethnicity. And that sounded extremely, extremely familiar to me. And so the most shocking thing about my time over there was how uncomplicated it actually is. Now, I'm not saying the details of it are not complicated. History is always complicated. Present events are always complicated. But the way this is reported in the Western media is as though one needs a PhD in Middle Eastern studies to understand the base.
First of all, the study of history best rewards the researcher. And history is not complicated because history is what has already been done. The interpretation becomes complicated because of people like him who switch the narrative. Please pay attention to what he's actually saying and how he switched sides.
Basic morality of holding a people in a situation in which they don't have basic rights, including the right that we treasure most, the franchise, the right to vote, and then declaring.
No, the right we cherish the most is not the right to vote. The rights we cherish the most are human rights, the rights to be human and to pursue our general aspirations as a people. When they always say, your ancestors, they died so that you could vote. No, they didn't die so we can vote. They were killed.
That state, a democracy, is actually not that hard to understand. It's actually quite familiar to those of us with a familiarity to African American history.
Well, Ta-Nehisi Coates, last night you were asked about the significance of Martin Luther King's words.
Before they get off into Martin Luther King, first let me say, those of us who are familiar with African American history understand that Zionists financed the slave trade, Arabs conducted the slave trade, and Americans were the biggest consumers of the slaves. Let's
On
start
Vietnam. You said it's taken you years to, quote, understand nonviolence as an ethic, and that you understood that ethic in Israel. Could you explain?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the thing to do is just to proceed off of what I said.
No, before he go there, how he was in the Middle East to learn about a nonviolent ethic. Clearly, they the most violent people on the planet at this particular time.
Martin Luther King dedicated his life to the fight against segregation. Israel's a segregated society. The occupied territories are segregated. The Jews segregated. It's not, hard to understand. There are different signs for where different people can go. There are different license plates forbidding different people from going.
I'm gonna say this and I'm gonna let it play some more. I'm gonna stop interrupting y'all. First of all, segregation was the best thing that ever happened with black people. During segregation, we built Black Wall Street, Rosewood. We built things for ourselves. And after we were segregated, they came and destroyed it, bombed it, and burned it, and did what they did to us. So, explain to me again why segregation was bad. You don't want to be separated from your enemy and people that hate you and despise you. You don't want to separate and be segregated away from your oppressor. Let's go.
at different places. Now, what the authorities will tell you is that this is a security measure. But if you go back to the history of Jim Crow in this country, they would tell you the exact same thing. People always have good reasons besides, I hate you and I don't like you, to justify their right for imposing an oppressive regime on other people. It's never quite that simple. And so that was the first thing. But the second thing I think that you're referring to is, this is like really personal for me.
Why?
Because I came up in a time and in a place where I did not really understand the ethic of nonviolence. And by ethic, I mean the notion that violence itself is corrupting, that it corrupts the soul. And I didn't quite understand that. If I'm truly honest with you, as much as I saw my relationship with the Palestinian people there, and as much as it was clear what the relationship was, it was at the same time clear that there was some sort of relationship with the Israeli people too. And it wasn't one that I particularly.
This is where you see the double talk and the shaping of a narrative. What is your relationship to the Palestinian people? Please tell me, what is your relationship? What is foundational Black Americans' relationship to Palestinians and Jews and Caucasian Americans? What is our relationship? That's interesting. What is our relationship?
Enjoyed, because I understood the rage that comes when you have a history of oppression. I understood the anger. I understood the sense of humiliation that comes when people subject you to just manifold oppression, to genocide, and people look away from that. I come from the descendants of 250 years of enslavement. I come from a people who sexual violence and rape is marked in our very bones and in our DNA. And I understand how when you feel that the world has turned its back on you, how you can then turn your back on the ethics of the world. But I also understood how corrupting that can be. I was listening to actually my congressman last night, or I guess it was 2 nights ago, talk on the news, and the journalist asked him, how many children, how many people must be killed to justify this operation? Is there an upper limit for the number of people that could be killed when you would say this is just too much? This just doesn't, compute. This does not add up. And I have to tell you, that congressman couldn't give a number. And I thought, that man has been corrupted. That man has lost himself. He's lost himself in humiliation. He's lost himself in vengeance. He has lost himself in violence. I keep hearing this term repeated over and over again. The right to self-defense. What about the right to dignity? What about the right to morality? What about the right to be able to sleep at night? Because what I know is, if I was complicit and